Do we have any follow-up from last episode? What's happened since last episode? What's new?
Well, so I've been thinking a lot, actually, because, last episode, we talked a lot about art and, like, what makes art really kind of, I think, powerful and a useful, like, formative kind of impact, right? And I recently re-watched with my wife the Royal Tenenbaums. Have you ever seen the Royal Tenenbaums?
Yeah, I think I did. That's Wes Anderson, right? No? You assented to that multiple times. Thanks for encouraging me.
I did. I just was really proud of your pop culture knowledge. You should start a podcast. You should do a podcast.
I'll get right on
pop
that.
Culture.
If I'm lucky, dozens of people will listen to it.
Exactly. Orthodox famous is not famous. Anyway, so we watched the Royal Tenenbaums. I haven't watched that movie in maybe a couple years, and I just forgot how much I love it. And it is so beautiful and so funny and so dark. It's many things. And when we were watching it, I was like, okay, so this is what is good art. Because when I watch that movie, I feel like it touches on a part of my heart that I don't have words for. And it gets to some kind of truth that can't be spoken. It's a truth that has to be told for another way, if that makes any sense, like the difference between speaking a truth and telling a truth.
Yeah.
It was a truth that was shown, that was lived, that was breathed. There was an image for it, a vision. And it just felt like it was the only way that it could have happened was in a story. And the only way that it could have happened was in this depiction of a family that was living into their truth and all the different things that come up as a result of it. And I think that it struck me then that, like, good art, I think, touches on those things that can't be spoken. It's something that has to be expressed and lived into in another way.
Yeah.
I want to go back and watch the movie again now because I just love it so much. I forgot how much I loved it. But,
Well, this podcast will now officially be a 4-hour podcast as we pause in the middle of it to watch the Royal Tenenbaums. I had a very artsy birthday yesterday.
Did you?
This is yesterday in our time, but I think by the time people actually listen to this, it will be way in the future, or at least a couple of weeks in the future. I went to a dance performance of a friend of ours, and it happened like not in a theater in a conventional sense. It actually happened in somebody's basement in Brooklyn, which was really cool. A bunch of people piled in there, and actually by the time we got there, we went out to the backyard, and there was like a little stage, and people were reading poetry, and then we came back in, and we saw a dance performance, and then a band came and set up, and like they played a bunch of songs, and then there was a dance performance again, and then at the end we did this really interesting kind of musical improv. All of the people that were there, like we did kind of a clapping, stomping our feet, just created sound organically. We just started like with a very basic rhythm, and then as people added to it and riffed on it and played upon it, it became this kind of interesting swelling, rising and falling piece of music. And for me, I thought that was really cool because I don't do very much of that, and I think most of the times that we consume art, it's something that's packaged and polished like a movie or a TV show, and it's something that goes out to a very wide audience. But there was something really cool about sitting on the floor of somebody's living room with, 20-something other people, listening to a band play like 5 feet in front of me, and then, a couple of minutes later, watching this little dance ensemble perform like this really cool and interesting piece, and then just everybody gets together and we close the evening out by making art. For me, there was something very communal about that. Art was the thing that brought all of us together, and art was the thing that really shaped the way that we interacted. It's amazing to see awesome like movie or TV show or listening to a piece of music, but there's something really raw and also equally hard to explain about being in the room when somebody does it. Not in the concert hall sort of sense, but literally 5 feet away from somebody in somebody's living room, just kind of like sitting there watching this amazing thing happen. And it's never going to happen again. It's this live performance that isn't being recorded and is never going to be shared with everybody else. So like those of us who were in the room at the time kind of experienced something together. People who I didn't know most of their names, didn't really meet most of them during the course of the evening, but we kind of shared something, and there was this little community that built for even an evening. So I thought that was a cool, very, again, raw, visceral, just from the heart experience that everybody shared.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I sort of feel like in some ways that experience, the counter part of it or whatever might be like cooking shows. You might as well just like watch a show of people smelling things, because it's like you can't experience what's going on in the room. Like all you get is really one sense about the food, You just see it, and then people are like, "Oh, this food has a very rhubarb with rosemary and mint dollop feel to it," and you're like, "Does it? I can't. I don't know. To me, it just looks like a hamburger."
What does a dollop feel exactly?
I don't know, like a Hershey's Kiss like texture. I don't know. But the thing is, like, I was even watching that Guy Fieri show recently.
Diners, drive-ins, and dives.
Note. Yeah, and this was literally one of the notes he gave. Was he goes, "This has got a good chicken taste," and I thought that does not help me in any way, Guy Fieri. Also, you need to change your hairstyle, but I guess that's kind of like your thing right now. And I think that you miss out on like the art of the food or the art of the experience because it's just you're extracting like this one part of it. And this is probably something we could talk about in a whole nother time, a whole nother hour, but you're just extracting this one little experience and trying to make it into entertainment more than art. I guess I resonate with that. That's all I'm trying to say.
Especially because it's the one experience that is really just difficult to quantify. Because like everything tastes like chicken, stereotypically. The chicken taste is really coming across this literally nothing. It does nothing at all.
Wow, Guy Fieri. Wow.
Like, this tastes like flavor is essentially what that means.
Exactly. This food has a nice culinary taste.
It tastes like somebody prepared it.
This tastes like I'm eating it. Which leads me
but that's
to
the
my
thing.
next question for you, Steve.
Do it.
What do you think about zombies? What's going on with that? Seriously, though. Like, it is hard to watch zombie movies and think that anything is going to be okay. They're just dripping in despair. And, like, they're just so scary. And I don't know. I feel like part of the reason in my life that I just have stayed away from, generally speaking, scary movies and zombie movies is for no other reason than just that they scare me. And I don't like to be scared by things. But I did, however, as we were brainstorming ideas for conversations, as we kind of talked about zombies, I kind of regrouped with my life and worked up the courage to watch some zombie stuff.
Nice.
So I watched World War Z.
Before you expound on World War Z, I just want to congratulate you because I think you made an amazing transition from Guy Fieri Food Network show to zombies. So I just want to acknowledge that before we go any further.
Because the link there is that Guy Fieri made me feel like everything is the worst, and so do zombies. Zombies and Guy Fieri. Now, which would be an interesting mashup for a television show, right? Like zombies food tasting would be like a really interesting thing because they would just be going from city to city eating different flavor of brains.
And they would say everything tastes like brains.
Yeah.
That would be their contribution.
There's a really good brain taste to it. This brain tastes like I'm eating it. Yeah, so everything's the worst. Zombies. The question I posit to you, sir, is why do we care so much about zombies? I mean, you've got The Walking Dead, you've got Fear the Walking Dead, you've got World War Z, you've got that new Elijah Wood movie, not even to mention just the canon of zombie movies that have come before this. Why is this something that we care about? Why is this something that appeals to so many people? Why does this appeal to us?
That's a great question, and I think we can do better than just the scary factor, which I think is the reason why I think sometimes talk about why people like horror movies and other sort of things in the genre. You know, like it's the reason why people like roller coasters and other scary things. But I think there's a deeper and there's like an existential note that's being hit with zombies. So like before our next retreat, which we're doing in San Francisco this coming weekend, which is going to be in the past for listeners, I'm doing a talk in Sacramento, and it's about why we believe in God, or I guess why I choose to believe in God and why I would submit that that makes sense for others. And some of the thinking for me when it comes to belief in God is starting with this existential quandary that we're in, the finality and the incredible just imposition and the inescapable reality of death. You know, which I feel like on some levels in our culture, we completely try to ignore, you know, so we have a very youth-oriented culture, and, you know, we make sure that the people who are our public figures are very young looking and very healthy looking, and we sort of paper over old age and things that remind us of death, but the fear is still there. And I think that's the reason why zombies in particular, as a thing, as this thing which is sort of theoretically dead, but sort of come back to life and is, pulling us into the abyss from which it crawled out of with gore dripping from its gross fangs. I mean, that's what I would say.
One of the things that that really hit me as I was watching World War Z was just how inescapable everything was. I mean, they were everywhere. They were climbing up walls, they were being found in airplanes, they were coming around corners, they were waiting for you outside of doors. I mean, just everywhere. And those zombies in particular, I felt were incredibly aggressive. They weren't at all the brain dead kind of that
shuffling along
that I so associate with zombies. I mean, they're tackling people on the streets, they're jumping over things, they're hurdling things. I mean, they were a unique brand of zombie, I thought. I mean, again, my exposure to zombies is relatively limited, but the aggressive kind of pursuit of death was what really struck me there. So I think you're onto something, that there is just kind of this feeling of death nipping at our heels all the time.
Yeah.
Following us and trying to pull us back into that chasm. But I guess that makes me kind of pause and say, so why the zombies then? I mean, if we're so afraid of death, then why have we come up with such a peaceless version of death that even when we enter into it, it's so terrifying and it's so dehumanizing.
Yeah.
And they are completely dehumanized, right? This is one of the things that I thought was really great in The Walking Dead that they capture. I can't remember that first guy that Rick stays with. I can never remember his name, but
the doctor, in the farm, or
no. When he's still in his town in season 1, and
his kid, right?
Son, but yeah.
Okay.
They look out the door, and his wife, the guy's wife, is standing at the door, and it's almost like he has this dawning of apprehension that his wife is no longer his wife. That everything that made her his wife is no longer there. That to me is very frightening, that our souls would just be kind of torn from our bodies and that our bodies would remain. And that actually, I think, ends up being more scary to me than the idea of dying itself. And we would just be these shells of ourselves. And so I wonder, why is that the response to this fear of death that we have? Why are zombies somehow, I don't know, more comforting to us than annihilation, for example? Annihilation to me sounds way better than being a zombie. I would rather just not be anymore at all. But there's something that remains of us. So what are your thoughts?
I don't think zombies are comforting, obviously, because it's a horror genre. I think it's death. It's particularized to human beings because a zombie horse or a zombie lion or a zombie elephant or something like that wouldn't have the same emotional resonance as, a person. I mean, that's the tragedy of a scene like that from The Walking Dead. It's a person that you know and you love, and you're looking them in the face, but you're not really looking at them in some way. It's their body, right? But it's not them, which is such a theological point, that we're more than just our bodies, and that you can look somebody in the face, but it's not them in a sense, because it's a piece of them, but not them. I think it gets at that fear. I think there's a fear of death. And I think there's also probably a fear of what lies beyond, a fear of an eternity of rot, an eternity of nothingness. I mean, for me, it's a very... this is kind of an image, or this is kind of an itch or a tension or just a fear that we have of what the world looks like without Christ having trampled down upon death. It's not even the comfort, like you said, of nothingness. It's this terror of a void that we just have to sit in. It's a terror of being consumed. It's a terror of biting, and it's a terror of gnawing, and it's a terror of the worm that Christ talks about in Scripture that does not end. It just keeps biting and eating at us. And zombies, in a sense, kind of embody that. Yeah,
I think you're right. And what you were talking about earlier with this culture of youth and despising all things old, we all want new things and we don't want things that are old. We kind of have turned our vision completely imminent, right? The horizon of our life is right now. And so all that there is this world. There is no real kind of cultural leaning toward an eternal kingdom, right? All that there is culturally speaking, now, right here. And so we're told to really be consumed with thoughts about our bodies, what we put into them, how often we exercise, what they look like, what we do with them, where we put them. And ultimately, right, those are all just pretty much in some sense what politics is all about, is these kind of regulations about what we do with our bodies or what we're willing to let other people do with their bodies. Because that's really what is like of most concern, is just like right now, it's all this grounding in this life. And so I wonder maybe if zombies then feeds into what we do on the one hand, like you said, living in this tension between, the fact that we're going to die. The scriptures say that God set eternity in the hearts of men. And so I wonder if like we have this sense that after we die, that there's something else. But when we've made our horizon completely imminent, then maybe all that there is to be a zombie. There isn't an eternal kingdom in another world. There is no afterlife per se apart from this world.
Because it's an unredeemed this world, right? The kingdom is this world. The kingdom of heaven is at hand, but it's a world that is lifted up and redeemed and sort of baptized and saved out of its limitations, right? So it's this world without sin, this world without death, this world without all the limitations and the decay that constrain it. The way that I think about it sometimes is like, did you ever read or study any Greek mythology when you were a kid?
I mean, yes and no. Not like in depth or anything.
Well, there's like a story of a guy who got a wish almost from one of the gods, as I recall, and he wished for eternal life, but he didn't wish for eternal youth. So the man, who was very young and very handsome and very strong and all that, just kept getting older and older and older, and he never died. And so he just got older and older and more shriveled. And the mythology part of this is that that's where cicadas come from, that he just kind of shrivels and becomes more dry over time, and eventually he becomes the first cicada. It's kind of like a more sanitized version of this. It's an eternal world, but it's a world without life. In the same way that he got eternal existence, wasn't even really life, right? Because it was never-ending decay, as opposed to never-ending health and never-ending well-being.
I mean, zombies, if you think about it, without Christ, they're the natural kind of response to this idea of never-ending life, right? Like, if all we know is what we know, that no one ever comes back from the dead and is, like, more human than they were when they went into the tomb, then all there is to be less human when you come out of the tomb, right? Like, that's all that really can be. You can't really be a living spirit. All you are is a living body. An undead body, I guess, is probably a better way to put it, right? Like, they're the undead. They're not living human beings. They're undead human beings, and that's deeply, deeply haunting, right? Whereas Christ, who we see, is the living human being, the truly alive human being,
Think about Lazarus. When everybody's gathered around the tomb of Lazarus and Christ says, roll away the tomb, everybody's like, he's going to
want to eat our brains.
Yeah, well, essentially, right? I kind of imagine it, if they had the vocabulary to talk about things that we're talking about, it's almost like they kind of feared that Lazarus was going to be this proto-zombie. Like, he's going to reek, he's going to come out of the tomb, and it's going to be terrifying. Like, why would you do that? Keep it closed.
Our Father among the saints, the proto-zombie Lazarus.
We'll have to add that to the calendar.
They just call him Laz Zombie. Oh, man. That's too funny.
I feel like that's a valid point of comparison, though, that's what everybody was terrified about, because they were just going to see this existence extended, as opposed to, like you said, like authentic life. Like, they weren't expected to see somebody come out in the light of the resurrection. They weren't expecting the smell of myrrh. They were expecting the stench of death. That's what zombies are. They're just like, they're rotten teeth, and they're pieces of flesh that are sort of tearing off, and they're wounds that will never heal. I mean, one of the cool things about The Walking Dead, for instance, like, it does have really awesome and haunting imagery. And like right at the beginning of episode 1, there's like the little girl, the famous little girl that's in the beginning of episode 1, right? And she's got no legs. She's just gnawed in half at some point during the course of this zombie apocalypse. And that's all she will ever be.
Unending death.
It's just this terrifyingly bleak. Yeah. And the contrast, because it's a girl, like it's a child, as I recall. And you compare the life and the joy and sort of jumping rope and all of this with just a spider-like creature that's just doomed for the rest of time until the sun finally like explodes and destroys the earth, just crawling along the face of the earth.
Like, Rick kills her. As I recall, like, that's how the show starts. The whole series starts with him killing this little girl who's been turned into a zombie. And it almost seems like an act of mercy in some ways, as much as it is like an act of self-defense, because otherwise little girl zombies aren't cuddly. there's still zombies. They still want to eat your brains.
No.
So Rick, he has to kill her. And so, like, you're right, there's this kind of bleakness to the fact that in this world as we know it, right, we probably sense that death is continually at our heels, and we do all that we can to avoid it. That when we think of eternal being, we can't conceive of it apart from that world filled with death, as opposed to a world completely alive in Christ. And so we just have to surrender to the bleakness almost, which was actually one of the things that I thought was really interesting about World War Z was, I mean, spoiler alert in case you haven't seen it, that the way that they kind of get through it is by succumbing to sickness. You know, like that they camouflage themselves in death to fight death.
Yeah.
Which to me had very much echoes of Trampling Down Death by Death, but it's fascinating to me, that idea of like this thing that's so scary to us often reveals, what does the doctor say? Like the thing that is its biggest strength and scariest thing is also the chink in its armor. And that's like what you get with Christ, right? The cross, that the fact that death is this hungry monster that is always going to eat. It doesn't pause to distinguish between swallowing a human being and swallowing the living God. And so it swallows the living God and has no choice but to spit him up and all of the dead along with him. Like, sorry. Gotcha.
It's a serious case of indigestion. Well, yeah. I mean, that's one way that people have talked about like Christ's saving work. It's the divine deception on some level. Like Christ is the worm on the hook. Right? And you have this ravenous beast that goes and takes the bait. And it's because of this greatest strength, its ability to devour, that it ends up undermining itself. Because of that trick, in a sense, that Christ plays on death.
Yeah.
This is, I think, an interesting theme that comes out in the zombie literature, right? Because you have this terribly wrenching scene where Rick has to shoot the little girl half-zombie. On the one hand, everybody knows, and I think everybody says in zombie literature that like these people are dead. I think for the most part, there's no vaccine or there's no cure or anything like that. Like they're rarely, if ever, portrayed as simply sick people, like they are dead people or undead people, as you said earlier. So why the tension? Why is it so difficult to pull the trigger then if you're not killing the girl? Because it's already a dead thing. It's not her anymore. Well, right?
That's a good question.
Why do you think that is?
I think to the counterpart, right, of you're saying like we are both this spirit and body thing. We're these hybrid species, right? Neither animal nor spirit, but some weird combination of the two. That just because the spirit has been lost from this person, they're not just like this. Like that still is your mom's face that you have. You know, like at one point Carl has to kill his mom, but she's already dead. Yeah. But he has to kill her again, and he's not shooting a zombie. He is, but he's not. So it's this tension of like recognizing, okay, what made her who she was to me relationally, in some sense, right, is lost, but she's still relationally my mom. Like my body still came from her zombified body, and we belong to each other in this weird way. And I think that there is that kind of sense of like you're still destroying the image of this thing that you love, this thing that you've been attached to. And I think that that does pay reverence to the fact that, like, the spirit of the person you love resided in that body once. And it's like the same way you wouldn't just go burn down a church that had been lost, right? Like that people no longer attend. You wouldn't go burn down that church. Like it's still a sacred space. And I think that maybe speaks to like our love of the material. That our love of the material is actually an okay thing. We're not Gnostics, right? Like we don't just say, oh, well, their spirit is gone. That's not them anymore. Because it still is, but it's not. It's not the same them, but it's them. And I guess I never really thought too many times about like the moral implications behind killing a zombie. All I know is that all the zombie movies presuppose that you're going to be one of the few that survives. You know, like that's why they appeal to you. But I know I'm going to be patient zero. I'm not surviving the zombie apocalypse. I'm going to be one of the first ones to go. So other people are going to have to do battle with whether it's okay to put me down. And I hope that they do. Is that an okay thing to say? I hope they kill me.
I don't think it is, right? But in a weird, convoluted sort of way, zombies are almost like an argument for relics. Because, like you said, it's the physical world is still important. And even though this body is now a bloodthirsty killing machine, like it's still connected in some sort of way to the person that it was, or to the person whose body it was, or even more accurately, to the person whose body it is. Like still, like Even maybe that's one of the things that bothers us about zombies too, because like you look out the door and you see the face of your wife, let's say, or you look down the street and you see the face of the neighbor kid that you knew, but it's like their body has been misappropriated or stolen in some sort of way. Like, that's not them controlling this. And that's such an intimate thing, obviously. Like, our bodies are the way that we relate to the world. I mean, I think that's why it hurts and it's so painful to imagine, and why it's so poignant to see in that first episode of Walking Dead, or like all those different scenes of like somebody that you know and somebody that you love deeply, and their body has been taken from them in some sort of way, and it's there, and it actually wants to do the opposite of love you at this point. I mean, it's just a force of destruction. But that's the thing, like, that's why we honor relics on some level, right? I mean, these are bones, but they're still the bones of the saints. Like, there's, in some sense, it's never going to stop being your body, which I think is just, like, fascinating when it comes to the resurrection of the dead and sort of thinking through the implications of that. Centuries later, after Saint, whoever has passed away, like, we still reverence his or her bones because they're still his or her bones.
And
death,
I guess
death is not going to erase that connection.
What maybe zombies lead us to, right, is this idea that apart from Christ, eternal life actually is probably not something we really want. Like, it's probably not what we think that it is. And in fact, in some ways, death becomes almost like a reprieve from the pain and the decay of this world, right, as it stands now, as it lies in sin. Thank God for death in some ways, right, because now there is an end to this decay and having to kind of like see your loved ones falling apart. And then that's one of the things that's always really interesting to me too, also about zombies. I mean, just like stylistically speaking, like, I don't know why all of a sudden, just because people become zombies, they have bad teeth now. I don't really understand that part of it. Like, yeah, I guess. I mean,
it enables gingivitis. Really, that's why.
That's all I'm saying. Is like, wow, you went from having pearly whites to being pretty gnarly now. But I guess, like, if you're biting through bone...
The Walking Dead, brought to you by Listerine.
Zero, I think he just forgot to floss, and that's kind of, like, how it happened. It really is just a mutant strand of gingivitis that is, like, happened to the world.
It's all dentists.
So we can all go home.
It's all dentist propaganda, is what you're saying.
Yeah, that's why you always leave a note.
And that's why you leave a note.
No, but, I mean, I think, like, the relics, right, is that the power of relics is not only, right, that these are the bones of these holy men and women who once lived in them and still will, but also, like, that somehow, like, the thing about the relics is that they're life-giving, right? Like, they're life-giving bodies, whereas opposed to the zombies are, like, these death-bringing animal bodies. And so even there, you kind of see what the human condition looks like redeemed, right? That even in death, God still works to bring forth life instead of just death, or more death already reigns. And I guess I feel like that's ultimately the only thing that can give hope, I guess, is this turning toward the kingdom of God, where there are no zombies and there are no flesh-eating viruses that cause gingivitis. You know what I'm saying? Like, all that there is unending life, and I think that the zombie thing touches on our desire for that to be true, on our desire to know that once we go into the grave, it's not going to be all bad. But we don't know how else to explore it because our culture is so completely tied to right now that we can't imagine what's yet to come, right? We can't live in the light of that. And so I think that the relics give us hope of that, whereas zombies kind of live more into the despair of that. That zombies can only exist in despair. There's no hope.
Definitely.
And really, the thing that ultimately falls apart for any zombie movie, right, is that the idea that the humans will rise up and defeat the zombies. And so it really becomes kind of this, like, story about human triumphalism instead of, like a hope for a world to come. I don't know. I mean, I think that zombies do awaken in us a hope for something else.
And I think that who the agent of change is very important, because zombie literature and zombie movies and all that are very dystopian, obviously. I appreciate it in the movies where the final triumph of the human beings is not assured, and like you kind of have this just sort of weird stasis that we're just going to have to be living with this or surviving with this as long as we can.
It's only time. All you're buying is time.
But the contrast is so cool because one of the themes that I think is underexplored when it comes to zombie literature is that it really is in many ways, when it comes to human society in these works of fiction, like a clean slate. you have this band of survivors and they get together and they have to rebuild society from scratch, and they have to, reestablish human settlements, and they have to reestablish safety, and they have to reestablish industry, and they have to reestablish just like what the world is going to look like. Which is kind of, what we try to do in our more utopian moments. We try to shape the world in our image. And I don't know if it's intentional or not, but I think it's cool to kind of contrast this kind of like silly and naive and really childish in many ways desire to be our own saviors with the dystopian black cloud that's hanging over the rest of this. Because, all of our attempts to be our own saviors, all of our attempts to make the world in our image rather than acknowledge that we are in Christ's image, like they tend not to end well. Maybe not zombies, but other sorts of horribly destructive, war or genocide or, whatever else is going on. That's the sort of the fruit of our arrogance. And in some ways, like, the zombie literature kind of plays up on that a little bit. Like, now we get to be the saviors of the world, but it's kind of because we destroyed the world and we're still never going to be able to save it anyway. We're just going to...
Right. Well, and The Walking Dead did pretty well, is that it's only a matter of time before the other people that you're trying to survive with become obstacles to you getting your way, to you getting what you want. And so you're not only fighting against the walkers, you're fighting against other human beings. Even the dystopian kind of idealism, if you can say that there is such a thing, because I feel like there is kind of like this dystopian idealism that these things live into. It can't find its completion and its fulfillment apart from the kingdom of God, right? Because it's only a matter of time before the willfulness of human beings turns against other human beings. When you look at the governor in season 3, he's like, I have this idea for what will make our world great, and I will kill anyone who gets in the way of it as we try to survive. It's really pretty tragic.
You're doing it wrong, guy. You're doing it wrong. Let's think about the 5 worst things about being a zombie. There's a lot. Let's kind of distill it to the top 5.
Okay. Well, for me, I think I would probably put that number 1 on that list is that I think holidays just wouldn't be as special anymore. You're not really excited about eating turkey with stuffing anymore. You're not looking forward to your family getting together. You're not looking forward to really just about anything except for the next sound that you're going to hear that's going to let you know that there might be something that you can eat. And plus, you don't really have any sense of time or culture when you're a zombie. So you're not like, oh, it's only 30 days till Christmas. Like, there's no zombie Christmas countdown.
Just grunts.
Yeah. And screeches, which are somehow more scary than the grunts to me.
Oh, mercy, yeah. That's a good one. I think it ties into my thought as to what would be terrible about being a zombie. I don't think that I would appreciate an insatiable love of brains. I think this actually is a result of my Greek heritage. Those Greek listeners out there will know that, no, seriously, every Easter, right, every Pascha, there's a traditional Easter soup, which is called magiritsa, which comes from the old country, and it's just like all the innards and the stuff from the lamb that is roasted, plus the brains. And I'm not a fan. No. Yeah, seriously. Like, give me the potatoes, give me the roasted lamb, give me the bread and all that sort of stuff, but you can keep your brain soup, because I don't want to love brains. And, I do not look forward to a world where I have an insatiable love of this disgusting, spongy... just awfulness.
But what if the brains had a really good chicken taste?
Paging Guy Fieri.
That's a really good point, too, because, and if you did develop a love for that taste, right, which brings me to my next point, that I feel like other food would kind of lose its flavor. You wouldn't think that you would really like any other foods after that. If you develop that taste for brains, you can't really go back to enjoying eating chips and salsa. All that there is gray matter, and that's all you want is gray matter. Give me all the gray matter. I'm afraid you heard me say give me a lot of gray matter. What I said was give me all the gray matter that you have. That's number 3 on the list, I think, is that other food is no longer as appealing.
Which is a shame, because, there will be plenty of Twinkies. They will last until the kingdom, basically. And they're just going to sit there in their warehouses.
Yep. They will.
And all the stupid zombies out there are just going to be, walking right by the boxes of Twinkies and going after the disgusting, disgusting brains.
Right.
Shame on you and your terrible culinary choices.
Yes. But at least it's a paleo diet.
Yes. Do zombies CrossFit?
I think so. They have to. I mean, you saw World War Z. They're like jumping over stuff and like climbing down things, and they're intense, man.
So many burpees. So many burpees.
Seriously.
So, like, we're on a food sort of theme, I'm realizing, as we go through our first three.
I guess so.
And our fourth is going to be no different. We're gluttons. I mean, I think I'm going to have to admit out loud, my name's Steve, and I enjoy food a little bit too much. So I'm preoccupied with it. So number 4 is, I do not think that I would like being a zombie because of the digestion issues.
Yes.
Like, here's how I think about it, right? Presumably, zombies don't actually need sustenance, because if they're actually dead, then their metabolism isn't really working, which, of course, like, that raises the question of how the heck the zombie is actually moving and how it's being controlled. Is it some sort of weird magic spell, or is it some sort of virus? Like, who knows? But they're not metabolizing, presumably. So this insatiable hunger for brains and flesh and whatever the heck it is that they're eating is just causing them to pack their gullets and their stomachs full of meat and matter, but it's not going anywhere. Like, they're not digesting. Like, zombies have to have such terrible stomach aches, like, all the time until they finally just blow up because of overeating.
Maybe that's why they're
which is a reason
so
not to be a
mad.
glutton.
Have you thought maybe that's why they're so mad? They're just uncomfortable all the time.
They're just looking for Pepto-Bismol.
That's all it is. I know that when I'm uncomfortable, I'm much more likely to want to bite somebody's head off.
It's a metaphor for irritability and gluttony.
And irritable bowel syndrome, more accurately.
Do you have IBS? You may be a zombie.
Maybe that's all this is. It's just like, so it's the dentists and the IBS Foundation. Is there a thing? Is that a thing? IBS Foundation?
The lobby.
The IBS lobby.
It's the IBS lobby.
Let's check it.
It's more sinister if it's a lobby.
Indeed. So digestion issues. And number 5.
Okay, that was 4.
Brings us to the end of our list.
Is this one food related?
And the end of our show. No, it's not. It's all about friends, right? Number 5, I think the worst thing about being a zombie would be that either all your friends are dead or trying to kill you again. And that is not a good place to live in, where your friends are either dead or trying to harm you. That would be kind of a bummer. I mean, especially, like, how do you talk to anyone in that scenario? Like, there's nothing to talk about with either demographic of your friends. You're just kind of alone now, and there's no one to turn to, especially when the going gets tough, as you can imagine it would for a zombie with irritable bowel syndrome.
That is bleak.
Yep.
That is really bleak. Are we going to end here?
I think so, man. I think that's, all there is now is the hope of the world to come, right? This is why we need Jesus, like Kanye needs Regis.
No, like Kathy Lee needs Regis.
No, I know what I said.